right, so welcome to the Path to College, Keys to College Readiness. Today we have a special guest presenter, Marci Schwartz. She is the founder of Thrive College Counseling in Los Gatos, where she works with students with unique learning profiles. She is also an Adjunct Clinical Associate Professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University. So welcome, Marci. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm going to go share my screen now. This will stop the other. Okay. Yes. Share screen. Okay. So we're all set. So I will be speaking with you today about the path to college, keys to college readiness. And thank you, Diana, for having me here. And I'm glad to see there are people out there that are going to engage in a fun and hopefully enlightening conversation with me today. So let's get started. This is an overview of the presentation and things I'm going to be speaking about, but just a couple of housekeeping things. If you have questions, just feel free to type them into the place that you're supposed to type it into. I guess it's the chat or the Q&A.
The Q&A field.
Q&A, thank you. So feel free to do that. And I will be focusing my talk to parents. There may be students out there too, and that's great. But I just wanted to just say that I'm going to be speaking more to parents. And if you have any questions from either the parents or the students, that's fine. Okay, so we are going to be covering the differences between high school and college. And then other topics include self-determination, self-advocacy, social skills, and independent living skills. And with each of these items, we're going to be talking about how families and communities can support the student. So we're going to dive into the differences between high school and college. And I'm going to I've given this similar talks before, but I've decided I'm going to start spending a little bit more time on this slide than I usually do, because I really feel like it's important for families to really understand where your student is going and how that is different, because it makes all the work we're doing now with students to help them get ready for college more understandable about why it's so important. So one of the main differences is that in high school, the focus is on success, and the student sees that the parents and the teachers and administrators are gathering around when the student is having a challenge to figure out how can we make the student successful in their math class or in school or whatever they're dealing with. And they're looking to create an environment where the student can show success. In college, people are not gathering around and saying, how can we support this student? They're there to help, but their job is just to provide access. So it's up to the student to seek out those supports so that the college can offer access to the curriculum. And so some examples of access could be if a student is visually impaired and they would need to provide access to the curriculum that each class has, so that the student whose visual challenges can have an equal learning experience to the other students. So they're there to provide access. In high school, the school has primary responsibility for making sure this happens. As I was saying, in college, it's the student that has the main responsibility for seeking out, arranging, and if they're not happening, if those accommodations aren't happening, then advocating for themselves. And this is a big area that we'll be talking about on future slides. An issue for parents that's an adjustment is that they typically have access to the students' records and can participate in discussions about what accommodations are provided, and parents just do not have access in that way without their students' written consent. And sometimes the families that I work with, that ends up happening if the student gives consent, but it's not like the disability offices at least that I've worked with are handing out releases for students to sign. It's not something that just comes up in conversation. Another big difference is when students go off to college, their purpose is really to learn. And in high school, the teachers can make accommodations and modifications in particular to the curriculum. They can just do every other math problem or make some other arrangement. And in college, the professors are not required to make any modifications or things like that, or even alter deadlines, although sometimes they will. Another piece is that the tutoring is different. In high school, that could be part of an IEP or a 504 plan. In college, everybody has access to tutoring, so it's not an accommodation that's provided, it's just available, and the students need to seek it out. There are some colleges that have learning specialists, and their tutoring and resources are more geared towards students with learning differences, but that's a little bit different, and we can discuss that in a little bit. But there are significant differences in the role of the student and the role of the parent and in the role of the teachers and the administrators. And there's a lot, because of all of the number of changes, there's a lot for parents and students to be aware of while they're in high school to prepare for those changes, because they can feel quite abrupt. So in order for students to be prepared, a really important skill is self-determination. And the main part of this definition that I want to talk about is that self-determination is a concept reflecting the belief that all individuals have the right to direct their own lives. So that is our goal for all of the children, all of our students. We want them to be able to grow up and have that self-determined life, that they know what they want, that they have the skill set to seek it out, and they can live the life that it feels right to them, as opposed to living the life that somebody else has told them that they should have. And in order for our children to grow up and to have that self-determination skill, there's things that parents and teachers and community members can do to help encourage the building of those skills. And that is that's something that we're going to talk about, because I think it's a real key piece on supporting our students to making that transition from high school to college. Okay, so we're going to go through some of these and give some examples. So self-awareness is, it's really the student's ability to understand what they need, what they want, their strengths and their challenges, what's important to them. Because it's really hard. The next one is self-advocacy, to advocate for a need if you're not really recognizing that you have a need. So we look at IEP examples, and this is a great opportunity for students to be at IEPs and to be aware of what accommodations they're getting, why they're getting them, and they're going to bring that practice of awareness and self-advocacy that they get from attending IEP meetings in high school that is going to directly impact their ability to walk into a disability office in college and advocate for their needs. So that practice is very important. In the work I do with students, I really tried, when they're in my office, I'll ask them before Zoom, so pre-pandemic when they were in my office, but I do it on Zoom now, is asking the student, why do they get, what services or accommodations do they get on their IEP? And they might say, well, I get extended time on tests. And then asking them, why do you get extended time on tests? And there's a decent number of students that don't know why. And so having that discussion that goes deeper than, I get extended time on tests, and so therefore I should have it, is not going to carry through when they're in college and they're alone and a teacher is saying, no, you're not getting extended time on your test, or a professor is doing that, and they need to advocate for themselves in a calm and reasonable way and explain. They don't have to tell their disability, but they need to go to the disability office and take care of their needs that way. And that is not easy to do when you're dealing with a bunch of adults. And so that practice that students get from being at their IEP meetings is really helpful. Self-efficacy is, that confidence, and that's very much related to what I'm talking about. And you can see that self-confidence in advocating for oneself is going to come from practice. There's not a lot of chance that we're going to expect students without practicing any of this, just walking into a college setting and having that confidence to do these things. So figuring out ways to support the student in building these skills. Now, another way to do it, a lot of the students that I work with, they get tutoring, whether it's through in their high school or privately, but they're getting some academic tutoring. And another question I'll ask families or the student is, who runs that tutoring? Do you open up your book to the student and talk to the tutor and say, I'm having trouble with these problems, can you help me? Or is the student going in and just sitting there waiting for the tutor to say, well, let's see what we have here. They're going through their stuff and saying, looks like you still have to do these things. And now it's very clear in those two examples, who's directing this. And that is a goal for students to work on in high school, of becoming directive of what their needs are, even in the tutoring. And it's not only academics where you want to still see these skills developing, the self-awareness, self-advocacy. It's that you want to see those things in chores at home. If a student was given the chore of emptying the garbage, or, taking the garbage out to the curb, is the student doing that? And if they're not doing it, asking the student, why do you think I asked you, why do you have this chore? If you didn't want to do it, what could we, why, what else can we work out? And helping the student to understand how practicing those chores is building their skills for college. And so we could talk later a little bit more about some examples about that, but those are important skills to help us see the transition of what we could do in high school that will support the student in college. Decision-making is a big area where I see the students are not always stepping up in high school, and then it's more challenging when they're in college. They're so used to, so many students that I work with are so used to following along with the structure of the day, of being told, of course, you have to take this math class, then you go to this tutoring, and they just kind of go along, and they're happy enough doing that, but they're not practicing their decision-making skills. And then there's a lot of decision-making that happens when you're independently living in a dorm and in college. And although it makes life easier in high school when the parents are sort of guiding things so that things get done, we're also not necessarily helping the student prepare in this area of decision-making, which is going to be important. So one of the things that families can do is create goals, create things that are outside of academics where there's a lot of tension, and have the student figure out picking a hobby or getting a job or doing other things where they need to think things through. So if they want to get a job and work at Jamba Juice, let's look at your schedule, let's set goals. How are you going to get your work done? How are you going to get there? Identifying all the different decisions they have to make in order to execute that plan. And it's going to take some thought on parents, on the side of the parents or teachers or others, even tutors, when tutoring a student, of pushing in some decision-making skills. Which do you think we should work on first, the math or the English? Well, the next question I would think of is which is due first, but is the student going to come up with that? And that's the kind of thing that we want to get, that critical thinking that, the students are probably able to do, but they're not exposed to it, and it's really important. Working independently is another big piece, to be able to start and complete tasks. And that's a challenge for many, and that's fine that it's a challenge for many, but then it's, what is the student have the self-awareness to know that they're not going to be able to execute an independent performance and get the help. Sit and do the work with a tutor, with a sibling, with a parent, and then helping make that work. So it's not so much that whether or not they can actually do that independently, but can they get the help that they need in order for them to complete the task that they need. Self-evaluation is really important because it allows the student to know whether or not they've been successful at something, and if not, they can revisit the goal. And we've all had that, right? We've all had goals that they didn't work out. We have had expectations, they didn't come through, and the ability to say, what could I have done differently? how could I have managed this in a different way, and then trying it again. And the next one is adjustment. Those are all skills that are really good to be aware of, because they're more tangible than just work on self-advocacy, which are good things to think about. But if you think about this slide, there's more directive things that we could do to work with our students to build these skills. So there's that. That was a long-winded slide, wasn't it? Are there any questions? Maybe not so far.
There was,
okay, so
there was
things
one
that,
question, but we'll save it for later.
Okay. So how can you help? Encouraging choices and problem solving around those choices. It could really be, where should we go for dinner tonight? And when a sibling is going to say one thing and a mom is going to say the other thing, and turning to our student that we're working with and saying, how are you going to help us solve this problem? So it doesn't have to be big, problems that are going to cause stress at home, although that might cause stress where we're having dinner. But just as families and educators, I think it's really important to come up with ways that we can very easily push in problem-solving skills, because what it does, it builds that confidence that a student is given a problem and they are slowly building that skill set of, I can do this, I can figure this out, this is not too much for me. And we want our students to go off into college saying, I've got this, I'm gonna need help, but I know that I know how to make this work. And that comes from little things and big things. So find ways for your child to explore new opportunities, and taking risks is a big deal. Not huge risks, I mean, they don't have to jump out of a plane, but is there something that they can do that's a little bit outside of their comfort zone? Because again, that builds their confidence, and it also gives them an opportunity to practice some of the other things that we were just talking about, if things didn't go well in something, can they reflect on it? Can they make a change? And develop those goal setting skills you could do at home, and supporting your child to understanding his or her disability is really critical, because oftentimes the students know at some level that they have a disability and they're not really sure what it is, but they really need to be able to articulate it to others. And also I have found in the work that I do that the students who are very articulate and aware of their disability, when they see another student struggling, they'll go over and try to draw that out and say, hey, it looks like you have trouble reading, I have dyslexia, do you have that too? Do you struggle with this too? And then they connect on it. And so when the students don't all know these things, then they lose that opportunity for connecting with somebody who shares a similar experience. And so there's so many angles that a student benefits from being able to understand and articulate their challenges, and of course their strengths. Don't forget about that. Okay, so moving to my next slide, self-advocacy. So now the rest of these slides, I'm going to be talking more about college and what's expected there, and I'm reflecting a little bit on the high school, but this is more talking about what skills we're going to want students to have, and where I'll tell you throughout the next couple of slides where I get nervous with students seeing their skills and then going off to college when I see that they may not be as college ready as I would like them to be. So self-advocacy is the ability to articulate your needs and make informed decisions, but it's not just academic, it's interpersonal. Is a student being bullied? Does a student know when they're sick? Do they know how to take their temperature or when to call a doctor? Like, those are things that I've worked with students where academically they can ask for help, but when something isn't going well interpersonally, they don't really say anything, and the parents realize because the student is feeling down. And that may be fine at home when the parent sees them, but that's not, awesome when they're in college in a dorm. So another piece of self-advocacy is, can the student consistently and in a timely way identify when they need help? Consistently is important because sometimes students, if their favorite teacher is right there, they'll advocate, but if not, then they won't. And I've had students say, yes, I'll do that all the time, and I'll change up the scenario, and I'll say, but what if there's a substitute teacher? And then they don't self-advocate. So we really have to kind of dig deep a little bit about what is the environment for which the student will self-advocate, and if you change the environment, will the student still self-advocate as consistently? Because as you know, going off to college, so it's a completely different environment. And then in a timely way, so I'll have students, they'll contact their teacher like the day before a huge project is done and then ask for help then, but that doesn't, in my mind, qualify as timely. The student really needs to seek out help before then so that they can manage things a little bit better and be closer to their timeline. And also communication skills. There's many students are shy. They don't know how to, they have the thoughts in their head about what they want to say, but it's hard to communicate it. Knowing who to talk to. So there's so many pieces of the self-advocacy that we don't want to just look at our kids and say, yeah, whenever they have a problem with their math, they always ask their math teacher, they've got self-advocacy. You kind of want to dig a little bit deeper and make sure that that it's covering more of the nuances of the self-advocacy and imagining what it's like in college. Okay, social skills. So you're dealing with roommates and classmates and professors, and that can be very tricky for students. And that can also be very overwhelming. There's dining halls and there's sound, feeling overwhelmed, and who to sit with, and where am I going to eat my meal, and who am I going to be with, and do I really have to have a conversation with them? And then I've had students who just didn't really eat regularly, and then the fact that they weren't getting good enough nutrition led to other things. So I know the slide is about social skills and not about eating, but that these things impact one another. And social skills are challenging for many students in a college setting when they're not set up for support. So, and another piece of it is managing emotions, and it's very easy to get frustrated when people around us are not acting the way we want them to. And so making sure that there's strategies in place for students to manage their emotions is another thing we want to look at for our college readiness. So some questions to ask is, how comfortable is the student communicating with other people? And then when they're upset as well. So if they are upset, how do they communicate with other people? And sometimes it's just going away and calming down and then communicating, because sometimes people come up and want to help when you're not doing well, and that's actually not a great thing to do, and you want to give people their space. So helping students to convey what they need is really important. And managing unfamiliar people is very different than, for students to deal with people that they're familiar with. So there's a lot of pieces of the social skills part to consider. Many colleges are doing a lot of great work with training their residence assistants, and they're able to identify students with learning differences they don't need to identify them. They're identifying when students need support, and regardless of whether or not they have a learning difference, and they have new strategies that they're working with, training the RAs so that they can be more attuned to the needs of students. So that's really good news. And so there's supports available within the dorm settings that can really help students who are struggling with their social skills and roommate challenges and such. Okay, independent living skills. So this is something that many of the students that I work with struggle with. Some of them are awesome on the personal hygiene, self-care. They've got the medication managed and all of that. And others really, it's not a priority for them, and they don't see value or purpose in it, and it's a struggle. What I have found, though, that the students that I work with are often quite interested in going to college. They want to see that happen, and this is an area that gets turned around pretty fast when they hear me or whoever else is saying, this is like a non-starter. If you're not going to shower without prompting, it's hard to be in a dorm setting. That's just not going to go well. And once the student sees that, I think that, and their age, by the time they're coming to me to work on the college counseling piece, they're 16, 17, and sometimes 18, and they are, their brains are developing and things tend to turn around, but making that connection of this skill is needed for your end result, that tends to help. But in order to assess that and help guide the student across that finish line, can the student independently manage their internet without adult oversight is another piece to think about. It is a question that is just standard for me that I will ask, does the family turn off the internet in the house in order for the student to go to bed? Because if I ask, do you go to bed, is your internet off, or do you manage your own Wi-Fi or your own things? And they'll say, yeah, I go to bed at 10, my internet is off, but who turned it off? Because it's not something that is going to happen in college. There's nobody turning the internet off in the house or in the dorm. And so figuring out the things that need to be worked on in high school so that that transition can happen is important. And sleep hygiene is very important for students, and it's very easy to stay up late on devices. Would the student be okay if their parents were out of town for a weekend or a week? And that's a great way to figure out how a student is doing with their independent living skills and the areas of support they might need. And now's the time to have those conversations so that we have time to build these skills. Because the idea is that our students are going to be able to figure this out to a great extent, but there's going to be some effort that we need to put in working on building those skills, and this is the time to do it. And another piece is the parental scaffolding. So I can ask a student all kinds of questions and they'll be like, yeah, I've got this, I could do this, I could do that. But it turns out often that the parents are prompting them to do that. And so that's an important piece for the parents to understand is, how often am I prompting? And if you think that you're prompting a bit, but you're not sure how often you are, something I'll ask parents to do that nobody likes to do, but I encourage them to just pick a day and just do it for one day, is for the parents to write down the amount of time every time they prompt the student. If they have to ask them 3 times to come to dinner, that's 3 ticks. And if they had to wake them up at, get out of bed 3 times, that's 3. And then when you look at that at the end, then you really can have a sense about how much am I inserting myself in what my student needs to do. And then once the parent understands that, then it's easier to come up with a plan. It doesn't mean let's stop doing that. It means what can we do to help the student build this skill? It's not about the parent just stopping. It's just rethinking it and saying, this is a challenge that we need to get on top of. Let's come up with some ideas. What could we do differently? And coming up with ways to help build these skills. And that example goes for all of these things. It's not, if it was about just telling a student to do something or just parents stopping doing something, if everything would change, things would be very different. But it's more about figuring out how we can understand the students' needs and come up with a plan to support their growth in these areas so that they can head off to college as they want to. So some things to think about in working with your student is you want to be able to work as a team, and because it does take a village. And you can see from a lot of the examples that I've given that there's a lot of things that we can do to encourage conversation and dialogue and building new skills, whether it's with the tutor or a teacher advocating or a student attending an IEP meeting or any of those things, or working with a therapist. really try to look at the college readiness piece as a team approach and not just a student-centered approach, because it's just too much pressure on a student without the support of the people around them that the student needs to build those skills. And be very careful about thinking through the student's strengths and challenges when thinking about the college readiness. All students have strengths, and we want to keep those front and center for the student. And why are they going to college? What is it that they want to get out of going to college? And some of my students, they know exactly why they're going to college. Other students are just saying, I just want to go. I just want to be in college. And either way, it's fine, but we still need to draw out the students' strengths and understand how they see themselves as having strengths, and how do they see their challenges, and how do they see their path to college being successful. And if I just said that last part, how do you see your path to college being successful, to a student, most students would have no answer because they have no idea what college is like. And I get I know, I've got it. And I understand why they're saying that, because they can't, it's too much information to take in about all these things that they need to learn to go to a place that they've never been, which is college. They've never lived at college. And so I think it's very important when we're working with students that we understand that where they need to be and educate them. And so pulling together sentences like, you have these great strengths, and so I imagine that you might be an English major because you're great at reading, and you like to read, but you might have some challenges in math. And so we need to figure out these math skills so that you can take your strengths and your challenges and go off to college. And so pulling things together in a sentence like that, so the student feels balanced and that the family sees and takes pride in the strengths, and it makes the challenges very workable because you have those strengths on our minds as well, and it helps guide us on our path to college. And talking, kind of the next one what I'm really addressing is engaging the student in conversation about the path to college readiness, and then being very focused on that so that they understand their steps. They don't have to come up with them all, but they have to understand that there's a path that they need to go on in order to get the readiness skills they need to be successful. And then I know that there's families that I work with where it's very hard for everybody to talk about this. It often comes up with those students who are very, very academically capable, but struggle more significantly on the basic college readiness, the hygiene, the self-advocacy, and things like that. And when there's a big discrepancy between the academic capabilities and these other challenges, it's very hard, I have found, for families, understandably so, to talk about the college readiness because it's so much easier to talk about how smart the student is. And I totally get that. But in the long run, you don't just take your smartness to college, you take your whole body to college. And it's very important that the student is balanced in their skill sets. Not only can they handle that fancy math class, but they can also handle their roommate, or they can handle showering and all of these other aspects of college. So if the parents are struggling having that conversation, it's really going to be hard for the student too. So a lot of it is going to come from the parents and you guys really seeing this first and helping your student see it as well. So I think I forgot a slide that I'm going to talk about, which is and actually I'm giving another talk, it'll be in that one, but just to give you guys an overview with all of this college readiness piece, just to talk a little bit about what you can find in college and different levels of support. And so there are some colleges that they just have the basic support. So if a college is getting federal funding, which most are, they will have disability services that offer supports like extended time on tests, test in a quiet room, a note taker, a lot of the basics that you would see. Then there's moderate supports, and those will have an executive functioning support group. They might have a learning specialist on staff, and they'll do more. It's still free, there's no cost, but they're, the moderate ones are just a little bit more robust in what their disability service offers. And then there's comprehensive ones where those are usually an additional fee. And those are more like giant resource rooms where the student will go in and they will say, hey, Johnny, it's good to see you. How was that math test you took yesterday? Come on in, let's pull out your backpack. Let's see how things are going. Like, it's much more, there's much more holding onto the student around their academics, and they'll also check in about how the student is doing socially. They'll have social groups, gatherings, things like that. Some will, some won't, depends on the program, and really working with the student to integrate them socially into the community of the college. There's some great programs like peer mentors. So if a student wants to join a Dungeons and Dragons group, but they don't want to go on their own, they get a peer mentor. The peer mentor goes with them, and nobody ever knows that that's not their friend, because they're just both college students. So there's a lot of great resources that that's available for students. And so one of the things that we want to do is we want to build up the students' college readiness, and then match their level of readiness with with colleges, depending on their available level of supports, as well as their academics and other things that are offered by the college. And so you can see that starting from the beginning slide of just how high school is different than college, and then moving through to right now where we're talking, where we've kind of covered all of these different aspects that a student can work on to build their readiness, and then finding their fit within a college. So it's something to be very cognizant of, this whole process of where is the student now in high school, what skills do they need to build, and where are we shooting for as far as supports within a college setting. So there is that. I think that's everything. Were there any questions? I kind of zipped through that.
Yeah, that was great information. There are a few questions. And so one of them is, so for example, if the child at home is really vested in playing a lot of video games and doesn't show a lot of self-motivation, and the parent finds themselves being that scaffolding all the time and falling into that pattern of nagging, what would you suggest to a parent to kind of avoid falling into that pattern of being the scaffolding, being that nagging voice to the student?
It's a really good question and a very common challenge. So there's a couple of steps to think about. One of them is starting with a conversation with the student about what their hopes are and their goals and what they want to achieve. And so you can say, you know, you're in 11th grade now. Are you thinking about going to college? We're hoping you go to college. Is that what you want to do? And then it'll be like, yeah. And then you start on where they want to go. And it doesn't even have to be a college conversation. It could be, you know, another opportunity. Oh, would you like to get a job so that you can earn money, or something that they're forward seeking that you could draw on. Now, there are students that's hard to find from them. They're not motivated for other things. And then that's a different challenge, but assuming that there is something that we can hook onto, that is our goal, is that we want to know what the student wants, and then back it up. You know, just take a couple of steps back and help the student see that if you want X goal, you're going to have to do A, B, and C in order to get there. And a lot of it comes from some of the executive functioning challenges, is that, you know, I have very good executive functioning, so I can see multiple steps in front of me. And I know if I want a goal over there, the steps just fall into place in my brain. I don't even have to ask my brain to do it. If you say, you know, you have a flight to Hawaii and, you know, it's leaving in 10 hours, like, go, I know exactly what I need to do to make that flight. Now, that's my brain. Other brains are wired differently, and they don't, that data does not come right down into their brain. And so they need it spelled out for them. And that's an executive functioning thing. And so if we think about it like that, how can we assume that if a student struggles with executive functioning, that they're going to be able to put together, if I don't, get off of my video games, I'm not going to reach such a goal. And so helping the student, to giving them information so that they can understand why you're asking them to do things. And then the other piece of it is that you want to encourage your student to be more independent about it. And so have them set an alarm, and you're going to play video games for the next hour. That's great. Did you set your alarm? So when the alarm goes off, you need to go and do this next thing. And then it's going to come, and then the student's going to be thinking, well, why should I do that? Well, if you can demonstrate this, then you get X, or then you're showing us that you're building these skills for here. This is another great example about why it takes a village and a team approach is very helpful, because this is where a therapist could be very helpful, an executive functioning coach can be very helpful, because it's somebody outside of the parents who's laying this information out and showing them these goals. Because I've seen, parents talking to students about why, you should do X and Y so that you can be ready to go to college. And they'll be like, whatever. And then they come into my office and I'll say, you should do X and Y so that you can be ready to go to college. And be like, oh yeah, I'll do that. Because I said, so sometimes it's, I'm a college person. And then Marci really said, she sat down with me, she had graphs, she showed this, and all of a sudden it clicked. And so there's many different avenues to approach this very common challenge. So I don't know if that really helped at all, but it's a tricky challenge, but it's not uncommon. I'm sure that if we did a hand raising, you'd have a lot of fellow sufferers in that too.
Right, I think you're right on with that. Yeah, so therapist or executive functioning coach, those sound like really good options, having a third voice be kind of talking in your child's ear. So another question is, you've shared so much great information. How does a family go about finding colleges that offer this type of moderate support?
So there are, any support, well, I'll just answer for any
I guess
support,
the different levels of supports.
Yeah, so there is the issue of lists. So people will say to me, so can I have the list of colleges that provide comprehensive support or these supports? And I asked myself that question when I got into this field as well. That was I'll just take the list and then I'm going to understand this as well. And I've come to learn that although a very good question, it's really not, doesn't work like that. So what you really want to do is, if the student that you're thinking about has some academic interests, like if it's a math major, you wanna think about all of the reasons why a student would go to college. Mostly to learn some new skill. Sometimes it's to be in a certain environment. They want to be in a city. They want to be near cows, and so you want to really figure out the setting that's right. The size of the school is a big thing. How does the student learn? Are they seminar style? Do they like to discuss things? Do they like to be lectured at? Do they like hands-on approach? There's colleges with an upside down model where they do more the hands-on, where you would typically think in the upperclassmen are doing. They start the freshmen out like that. So it's they just go into the learning. And so before you want to look at the supports, in my opinion, you want to look at what is the best environment, the types of environments for my child. Because if they're great at math and we're going to a program that's hugely liberal arts and music, and they might have some math, but not to the degree that the student wants, like, I can give you the best supports ever. It doesn't matter. And I've tried that. Like, I've sent students to schools because I fell in love with, oh my God, this is the perfect school for you. The student goes there, they sit in on a math class, they're like, forget it. I'm not going to this school. And so before you think about the list, think about that. And then from there, once you've kind of come up with some colleges based on this other more mainstream research that any parent and student are going to do, then you can look at some lists. And those, there's a K&W guide. There's There's College Express. You could even Google colleges for my student who plays the trumpet and wants to major in math with dyslexia, and just kind of put and see what comes up. People like me, there's other people that do what I do, which is the college counseling piece specifically around learning differences and other bumps or challenges, mental health challenges. And we just know we've visited colleges, we've talked to people, we've sent students there. And so you're just going to get different information from me and my colleagues, but you can certainly get a lot from Googling, but I wouldn't go straight for the disability services. I would look at that other stuff first. I hope that made sense.
Right, those are great points. As much as a parent feels like, the child is choosing such superficial reasons for, that certain college environment, it shouldn't be underweighted in the consideration process in their sense of importance to the child. So that's a great tip. And so there can be situations where a child is conserved, and so the parent has all the legal rights to making decisions in the child's life. For the most part, the talk today is geared around not those types of situations, but rather towards the child who is participating in regular ed, mainstream classes, maybe receiving some supports, and is truly on the path of being college bound or preparing to become college bound. But we do have a question. If a child is college bound, but yet is still conserved, do you have any information about the privacy issues and working with the school with the students' records and things like that?
You mean well, it's not your question. I don't know if you would know, Diana, but so I'll just say in general that the information that goes to a disability office, so if I have dyslexia and I send the documentation that I have dyslexia to the disability office and then they give me certain accommodations, they cannot tell anybody why I have extended time on my tests. They're going to give me a letter that says Marci's entitled to extended time on her test, and I give that letter to my teacher, and then they're going to give me my accommodation, but they're never going to know why. And so there is confidentiality. The only reason why you would ever know that I have dyslexia is if I said. And so there's a whole, I can give another talk on the concept of disclosure, because we all disclose in different ways and in different times and for different reasons. We all have our, what we want to disclose, how much we want to disclose. I might have dyslexia and autism, but I maybe feel more comfortable saying I have dyslexia, but I also am getting that accommodation because I have autism, but you'll never know because I chose not to disclose it. But to my roommate, I've told I have autism, but not dyslexia. Like, my point of saying all of this is that it's my choice. And nobody else in the school can share that information. And I guess the information you're asking about is, would it be the fact that the student is conserved would be the confidential piece. And I think that would be, you should probably speak with an attorney about that piece, or maybe somebody at Regional Center, or maybe somebody at PHP knows, because if the student is conserved, then they're not able to make the same independent decisions in college that somebody who's not conserved could. So I'm not sure how that would work.